waiting is an art that our impatient age has forgotten. It wants to break open the ripe fruit when it has hardly finished planting the shoot. Whoever does not know the austere blessedness of waiting, that is, of hopefully doing without, will never experience the full blessedness of fulfillment. I don't know if you've ever held a baby that's just 8 days old. Everything inside you tells you to handle it like it's made of glass, especially when it's your first time holding something that young. I remember taking our little one from the hospital after she'd been in there almost a whole week on the way home. I felt like any wrong move could break her, and I remember driving home with her in like what looked like a hugely oversized car seat, and I drove about 5 miles an hour. She seemed all the more precious to us because we'd waited 10 years for her to come along. 10 years, a decade of waiting and wondering. A decade of people asking and not understanding and smiling at unhelpful comments and looking at other options, and then there she was, another 8 years on and our second little lady arrived. Now we were 18 years into this waiting process. That's almost 2 decades. In fact, we'd given up on number 2 just months before discovering that she was coming. Why would God want us to wait that long? Why the pain of the pause? And why for us? And why for others? And not just with families, but with love, or with jobs, or with recognition, sometimes with justice issues that are not coming around, or safety that needs to be grasped. And sometimes, painfully, time just seems to slow down. Maybe part of the answer is about like this collision of lives that needs to happen. When my wife and I both felt called to give up our paid jobs and take this 3-year unpaid residential course to study theology together, we had a lot of questions. But in the end, we felt God direct us to a very specific college, and those 3 years taught us so many lessons about relying on God's provision and trusting Him even when we can't see the end goal, and humility, as well as all the lessons we had to understand about how to interpret the Bible better. But it was this collision of lives that had the biggest effect on us. The lecturers and the staff, the other students, the churches we were placed in, the friendships that we made, the people that we were led by, and those that we had the privilege of leading. These magnificent collisions that changed everything for both parties. Had we gone to college at a different time, we could well have learned the same theology lessons and probably some of the same life lessons, but this collision of lives would have been totally different. And somehow, in this paradoxical mix of God's plans and our free will, somehow in all of that, there were people that I was supposed to meet. There were people I was supposed to influence, people who I was supposed to be influenced by and changed by, and bless and challenge and get angry with and stand up for, and love. And all the things that have happened afterwards have also happened at the right time for them. It's like a chain reaction that should not have started earlier. Timing. Time is important, which means that waiting is important. Some of those moments from that college have lasted decades, and some just were single instances, but sometimes we have to wait for something because the collision of worlds that God knows needs to happen And the domino effect it will have is running according to his clock, not mine. There's a moment just like that in the life of Jesus when he is only 8 days old. He's taken by Mary and Joseph into the temple to perform purification rites that Moses commanded like centuries before. And this is where this collision happens. So there's a man living in Jerusalem called Simeon. He's living a pure, devoted life to God, and he's in the temple all the time, and he's deeply, deeply waiting. He's longing for God to bring about what God's promised in the Hebrew writings, that one day there's going to be a day when God comes and lives with his people, and like everything's going to change. Importantly, the Spirit of God had revealed to Simeon that he wasn't going to die until he had seen this saving one, this Messiah figure. I mean, how long had he waited? Definitely it was decades. How many times must he have questioned that feeling that he had, that unprovable certainty that on the same day that Jesus arrives in the temple, as an 8-day-old baby, the Holy Spirit moves in Simeon. So he goes into the temple at the exact same time, after years and years of expecting and waiting, and they collide, and he sees the one he's been waiting for. I wonder how many times he stood there in the temple and Jesus hadn't even been born. I wonder how many times he'd been standing there in the temple and Mary and Joseph hadn't even been born. But now he's there and he's standing there and he's holding this new life that God reveals to him, that this is the one. And he's so filled with wonder that he spontaneously comes out with, God, you're Lord over all time and space, and just as you promised me, here he is, and now you can dismiss me, your servant, in peace, because my eyes have seen your salvation. And amazingly, that's not the end of the story. Like, there's another collision which is about to happen. Another person who's been waiting and waiting and waiting, expecting that and believing that God is going to do something, but they've yet to see it. This one's called Anna. Anna has a tragic story. As a young woman, she marries, but only 7 years into that marriage, her husband passes away, and she lives from then until she's 84 years old, and every day she comes into the temple to worship God. Every day she's there praying and worshipping with the promise of a deliverer. I wonder how many times she'd been there and she had doubted and wondered and asked that question that's so easy to ask. The question that I asked so many times waiting for our girls to come along. Have I read this wrong, God? Am I ever going to see this? I think sometimes we all have those questions, but there, at the same moment that God reveals to Simeon who Jesus is, Anna comes over and she says the same thing. And immediately she starts to give thanks to God, and her heart is just bursting with thankfulness and wonder, and she speaks to everyone. I wonder if I'd waited 60 or so years for an answer or a promise or a change that I've been waiting for. Would I have stayed so humble? Would I have stayed so sweet in my spirit? What wonder would I have missed on the way? How much would I have short-circuited it or circumvented it or forced into being something too early? Some things are too important for the timing to be in my hands. Some collisions need to happen at exactly the right time in order for them to have the impact that they need to have, to meet the right people, to be in the right places at the right times. If ever there was a time in our history when people would be waiting for justice and peace and a promise that kept on failing, it would definitely be the First and Second World Wars. But around that time, and someone who lived through all of that, and then living in the austerity that came afterwards, this was written. Waiting is an art that our impatient age has forgotten. It wants to break open the ripe fruit when it's hardly finished planting the shoot. Whoever does not know the austere blessedness of waiting that is hopefully doing without, will never experience the full blessedness of fulfillment. So may we wait expectant of God to be a good God. May we learn patience and grace for the journey. May we stay sweet. And as God unfolds the collisions that will only happen at the right time, may we see His hand in it all, Him revealed to us through circumstances and patience. And may we experience the full blessedness of fulfillment.